We're taking time to look at organizational culture, why it's important for the organizations that we are part of, and how leaders can approach the shaping of organizational culture in a helpful manner for their communities. As we do so, we're going to be walking through 5 broad areas, looking at them in light of the questions that leaders and others bring to organizational communities. We'll be looking at the why question of purpose, the what question of organizational mission, the how question of organizational strategy, the who question of organizational values and beliefs, and the what if questions of vision. In this particular segment, we're going to be tackling purpose and the function of purpose in organizational culture. Here I note that purpose is one of these elements that may or may not be written down in terms of the organization's documentation or made public. But even if it is not written down, it is something that must be present in the overall organization's culture. That is, what's involved with the spoken culture, the climate or ethos that is a part of the community. Deep down, the leaders of that community and the organizational members of a community need to have a sense of why. The idea of purpose, answering the why question of organizational identity and culture. Here I note that statements of purpose are focused on answering the why questions of organizational identity and culture. It helps leaders and organizational members, as well as constituencies, to understand why it is that the organization is existing, why it is that that organization is going about the work that it's doing. People are motivated by purpose. They have a deep sense of understanding the importance of why what they're doing matters. This has been a particular area of research that's been of interest to me. I've been looking at why it is that leaders having a sense of purpose adds effectiveness to their work in broader organizational communities. And the results continue to come in that it matters, that it has a positive impact on organizational measures of effectiveness in a variety of different ways. So as we think about purpose, I want to encourage us to recognize a few different important dimensions of what we're talking about with purpose. Some of the questions that we can think of related to purpose, some of the questions that are associated with this is, why do we do what we do as an organization? Why does this organization exist? Why is the story of this organization significant? And related to this, how does the story of this organization fit into the story of life in general? How does the company's narrative fit into the broader meta-narrative of what surrounds the organization? And when we talk about purpose, it's important to recognize that there are both ultimate and subordinate dimensions of purpose. For instance, approaching this idea of purpose from a Christian perspective and looking at biblical foundations that inform our understanding of purpose, we would recognize that there are ultimate answers to the why question of life that relate to organizations and congregations. These are often theological in nature. They relate to what we might see as the vertical dimensions of the greatest commandments. One question that is dealing with ultimate things or ultimate purpose would be the question of, how is this organization honoring God? Now, there are also important subordinate dimensions of purpose as well. While the ultimate may be more theological in nature, the subordinate tend to be anthropological in nature, that is, focused on humanity. These are associated with the horizontal dimensions of the greatest commandments. How is this organization filling basic human needs at a human level? Now, ultimate purpose and subordinate purpose are meaningful. An organization needs to think through their elements of both ultimate and subordinate. This is certainly true for Christian organizations and for churches to understand the theological motivations behind why they exist. But even for general businesses, how are they seeing their work and as relating to purpose in affecting positive outcomes on humanity? Do they understand not just what they do, but why they do what they do? When we look at ultimate purpose, a verse that would point to this kind of principle would be Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Now this motivation here, we might add to it not only the simple items of eating or drinking, but as you go about your work and organizational life, as you engage in your leadership work, as you engage in the work that you have as a congregation or as a nonprofit or as a business, how are you doing your work in such a way that it not only is fulfilling basic human needs, but also is done to the glory of God, done with a motivation to bring honor to God in the work that is done by that community? This is an example of ultimate purpose drawn from Scripture. When we think about the example of doing all that we do for the glory of God, drawing from 1 Corinthians 10:31, here's an example of a church trying to capture that idea in their purpose statement. Well, this is an example of how a church captures that sense of ultimate purpose when they say that the purpose of Wooddale Church is to honor God by making more disciples for Jesus Christ. Well, this is a statement drawn from Wooddale back in 2013 that captures the heart of their, as a church, wanting to go about their work in such a way that brings honor and glory to Jesus Christ. Their focus, their sense of answering the why question at a theological and ultimate level, is that they want to do their work to honor God. But of course, this statement also captures some anthropological dimensions as well. They want to connect with people. They want these people to connect with Jesus Christ as disciples. And herein is an example of both some of the ultimate and subordinate dimensions of purpose within a crisp, decisive statement by Wooddale Church. Now, as we shift to some of the subordinate dimensions of purpose, we might draw upon the horizontal dimensions of the greatest commandments. Here in Matthew 22:39, we read, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." This statement of purpose is oriented towards fellow humans. How are we going about bringing love to those who are our neighbors? Well, this is a call that Scripture gives not only to be thinking about ultimate purpose at a theological level, but also subordinate purpose at a human level. We might look at the example of Tom's shoes as a picture of subordinate purpose. Tom's shoes focuses on their one-for-one movement. And note that we are in business to help change lives. In other words, Tom's Shoes is in the business of selling shoes to people, but they argue that it's more than that. It's about helping to change lives. It is a movement that's focused on purchasing a pair of shoes that you can use, and at the same time the company donating a pair of shoes to someone in need. Lives are being changed, both the person who is on the consuming end and the person on the receiving end, and Tom's Shoes becomes a facilitator of this work in bringing value to greater humanity. There is an anthropological purpose in the work of what Tom's Shoes is about. Here are some questions to ask when you're thinking about developing statements of purpose within your organizations. What would the world lose if our organizations cease to exist? Why don't we just shut the doors? Why do we want to dedicate our energies to this organization's efforts? Well, Collins and Porras raise these questions as examples that help us get at the driving sense of purpose. What are your answers to these core questions? If the answer is no, it's not better for us just to shut up the doors, why is that? What is the core motivation that helps you get up in the morning and engage with the important work that you have? What is that driving sense of purpose and passion that's guiding your work as a leader and your work as an organization? When we think about evaluating good purpose statements, Leith Anderson suggests the following in his Leadership That Works book. Can the statement be memorized in 3 minutes or less? Is there more than one punctuation mark? Can it be easily explained and understood? The reality is if you have something that is too complex, something that takes a long time to memorize, something that has a lot of complexity in terms of its sentence structure, or something that just is difficult to understand, difficult to explain, it's not going to be replicable. It's not going to be something that can be passed on in a way that's effective and memorable and allows the community as a whole to own in its deep sense of purpose. And so Leith Anderson recommends some very practical elements. Your statements of purpose should be able to be memorized quickly. There should not be more than one punctuation mark. And it should be something that is easy to communicate, easy to understand, easy to explain, not just by the leaders, but by the members of that community as well. When we think about some final thoughts on purpose, it really comes down to what purpose provides for a community. Well, purpose provides a basis for the organization's work and strategy. We're going to go on in some coming presentations to focus on mission, what it is we do as an organization, and strategy, how it is we go about the work. But before we get to work and strategy, we need to understand what is the basis for that work. Why are we going through the effort to do these things? Purpose provides this. It provides a basis for the important organizational work and strategy. It also provides a contextual framework for understanding how the part fits into the whole. Are we looking at just an individual component element of an organization's work, or are we seeing how the whole system works together to bring about the good work of this community? It is a seedbed for significance, both for the individual and for the organization. Is the work that's being done significant? Having answers to the why question of organizational identity and culture provide this seedbed of purpose and significance. And simply put, it provides meaning for the mission. Is what you're doing, does it matter? Well, does it have meaning? Purpose gives answers to these why questions that provide meaning for the mission. First step in organizational culture is to understand why you are doing what you're doing as a community. As a leader, help your community understand its driving sense of purpose, answering the why questions of organizational identity and culture. Again, whether this is something that is publicized and advertised on your websites and in your branding is another question. But do you as a community understand the answers to these core why questions? And is this driving who you are at the culture level?